Act relating to Vermont Child Tax Credit and the
You are
Vermont
now live.
H510, Act relating to Vermont Child Tax Credit and the Vermont Social Security Income Exclusion. Graham Campbell is going to, this book analyst will join us to run us through the bill and how it works.
Thank you, Senator. For the record, I'm Graham Campbell from the Joint Fiscal Office. I was requested to come into committee today and overview sort of a presentation that I did for the Ways and Means Committee. And for that committee, I was asked to look at more or less who might be benefiting from the child tax credit within H510. So recall there are two big pieces within H510. There is the child tax credit, and then there is an expansion of the Social Security AGI threshold. Today, I'm actually only going to be talking about the child tax credit portion and the potential the benefits, who might be benefiting from it, and other potential impacts. So I will share my screen for the committee here. And then can everyone see that? Is it big enough?
Yeah, can you make it not have the preview?
Oh, I don't know if I can do that or not.
Well, we can deal.
And Graham, we have a copy, each of us has passed by the House, so
okay.
follow along.
Okay, I'll just remind the committee what's in H510. This is slightly different than the copy I sent to Faith. I made a correction just before I stepped in here. I'll send the correction to Faith, but I'll note that when I get to it. So H510 creates a new Vermont child tax credit. It's $1,200 per year for every child 68 years of age or under. And it's paid out in kind of two ways. So in tax year 22, so when you file your taxes in April 2023, the full $1,200 will be given out to the families that are eligible for the credit. And the beginning in 2023, one half will be paid out as an advance payment in September 2023, and the other half will be paid out in April of 2024 or when they file their taxes. So the idea here is that in this tax year that we're in right now, tax year 22, the credit will be paid out when the individual files for their taxes in April 2023. And then in 2023, this sort of advance payment construct comes into play where one payment is made in September of 2023 and the second payment is made when you file your taxes. It is phased out after $200,000 of AGI for a single filer and $200,000 for a married filer. It is fully refundable, which means that if you don't have a tax liability or if you have a tax liability that's smaller than the size of this credit, you will receive a payment from the state. And we estimate that this would reduce state revenues by $48 million, and an estimated 40,000 children would benefit from the tax credit.
Sure.
Excuse me, Graham.
Yeah.
Graham, just curious, do we guesstimate that's a little over 20,000 families? Or what's the distribution of those kids?
I believe it's in the fiscal note, but generally Vermonters have less than 2 kids per family. It is, I think, if I remember it from the fiscal note, somewhere around 30,000 taxpayers will benefit. So tax returns rather. So I think that's probably a better proxy of filers that would benefit.
Thank you.
So I was asked by the House to get a sense of who might be impacted by this. So the reason why I had to sort of look into this deeper is because while we do have an income tax model in JFO, and it does have information from the federal child tax credit, the federal child tax credit is for children up to 17 years of age, or is 16 and under. And so we can tell basically from federal Vermont tax data who benefits from the federal child tax credit, but not from for children under the age of 6 and under, which is the provisions in this bill. So we had to go to a secondary data set and which was the American Community Survey from the census. And what you see in that data is that families with young children tend to lie basically throughout the entire income distribution. But the general rule of thumb is that very high income families do not tend to have children that are very young. And then, very low income tax filers do not tend to have children that are very young. And I think the explanation for that is for the very low income households. We have a lot of students, for instance, so that's skewing sort of the numbers a bit. And you might have a lot of, business owners down there that have low AGI because of deductions. And then the higher income households just tend to be older in nature, and that's the life cycle of income theory. You tend to have your highest career earnings when you're between the ages of 45 and 60. And so older individuals do not tend to have young children, but they also tend to have high income as well. And so what you're seeing in this table is sort of this distribution of families in that first column that's essentially showing the share of households in that income category that have at least one child ages 6 and under. And so it ranges from 8.3% for the $0 to $25,000 group, and goes up and down, but it's 6.1% for those over $300,000 in AGI. But you see first, the first sort of spike is for those making between $25,000 and $50,000 in AGI. That's sort of a relatively low income category in Vermont. And then you see a sort of a second wave for those between $75,000 and about $200,000. And those we estimate to be sort of married couples, married couple that both spouses are working. And so that's how they have sort of upper middle income, and they tend to have younger children. The next slide I have is showing essentially the theory that higher income, less kids. This is from a paper published in 2021, which was examining the impact of the federal child tax credit that was expanded in tax year 21. And essentially what it's showing is the number of working parents on the y-axis and their taxable earnings on the x-axis. And then you see the number of working adults with children by these earnings groups. And so you can see that for taxpayers between $0 and $50,000 of taxable earnings, there are 4 to 5 million workers with meeting that sort of category, having children. But as you go higher and higher with the income distribution, the number of workers that exist with children with that income becomes less and less and less. And you see that it's a relatively steep slope. So basically after around $150,000, $200,000 in taxable earnings, the number of families with children, or number of workers with children rather, is relatively small, and it doesn't change that much. So you get this sort of steep, how to describe it, steep slope for this graph, meaning that in relation for this child tax credit in Vermont, that what we found when we were modeling this out was that if you made the income groups, the income thresholds for the child tax credit much higher, the cost did not actually increase that much, just because there's not that many children above $200,000 of AGI. And that's primarily the reason why this bill ended up at $200,000 in AGI, because once you start going lower than that, you start cutting, the amount of kids that you're cutting out of the child tax credit becomes more and more. Is everyone sort of following what I'm saying here in this chart?
Yes. Could I ask a question? Graham, are you saying that there's about a little over 5 million Americans who are earning about 20 grand that have a kid? Is that what this is saying? Is that what that
Yes.
Okay.
That's correct. Yeah, that's what this chart's showing, each data point. So if you look at like that first data point, not the one that's at the bottom, but the sort of the second one spiking up, that's what that's telling you. There's over 5 million workers with 5 million adult workers with a child with AGI of probably looking somewhere around 20,000 AGI.
Okay, thanks.
So what I'm calling other salient data, other important data here is that, as I said, families with older children tend to have older parents. And because older parents are more likely to have higher income, they're less likely to have children. And so that's what you see here in the top chart here. This is showing the percentage of children in low income and poor families in 2016. This is national level data from other sources aside from JFO modeling, but you can see that there are a lot of children that are considered in either low income or poor households in the United States. And that's because parents with young children tend to be sort of at the beginning of their earning years and therefore have lower income. And so that's why you see, a very relatively high percentage of children living in either low income households or in just straight poverty in the US.
So am I right that for 75% of people either in low income or deep poverty have kids under 3? Or is that saying of the parents that have kids under 3, 75% would be considered low income or below?
No, so the chart is the percentage of children in low income and poor families. So for those first 3 bars, for children under the age of 3, 44% of them are, I think these are inclusive. So 44% are in low income or below. 21% are poor and below, and then 10% are in deep poverty.
So
they overlap.
Yeah, inclusive. But still, I mean, poor and poor here is federal poverty, or what, like, where do I figure that out?
I'll have to look up what exactly the definition for poor is in this chart. I don't know.
When we say 1 in 5 kids in this United States goes to bed hungry, I'm assuming that jives with this. 21 are considered poor. I mean, that is pretty shocking. Richest country in the history of the world.
Yeah, I'll look into the definitions for what poor versus deep poverty versus low income mean in this chart, and I'll get back to you.
Thanks.
But you can see as you go up in age category in this chart, the sort of bars go down. The numbers are still quite high in terms of percentages, but for the children between the ages of 12 and 17, the percentage of them living in low income households is 37%, relative to those under the age of 3, it's 44%. And that's almost certainly because the parents of those children between the ages of 12 and 17 are, in general, earning more dollars than those with the children under 3. That, and it's possible that in the 12 to 17 age group that some of them might be working. The second bullet point here is that there's a long established link between young children and low income. And the research that I read is that a large explanation for that is because of decreased employment amongst parents with families with young children, because what's called the parent trap, where a parent has to stay home to watch a child, and therefore they are no longer in the labor force, they're no longer earning as much income, and therefore they are more likely to be poor or in lower income households. So the second table here shows essentially the population of American families with no children, those with young children. So this is the youngest child under the age of 5. So not exactly what the children we're talking about in this bill, but very close. And then older children. So the youngest child is between the ages 5 and 17. So going across the chart, there are 127 million families in the United States that have no children under the age of 18 at home. There are 26.8 million families with a child under the age of 5 in the house, and then there are 41.8 million people with a child between the age of 5 and 17. You can see that in the next row, the young children families, the median age of the parents tends to be lower. So 33 years versus 47 for the no children families and 43 for the older children families. Well, the next one shows you kind of this income trap, the next sort of row. So the median household income for no children households, $53,000. It's $59,000 for young children households, but $71,000 for older children households. And then you can see the next line, the labor force participation ratio. This is the share of the adult population that is able and willing to work. And that is, it's 77% in the young children households, but 82% in the older children households. And you can see the mean weekly hours worked is less in the young children households, and the poverty rate is higher. And so that yellow area is sort of showing this, what is called the income trap, where younger families with young children, the employment of either parent is impacted because of watching children, and therefore the earnings of the household suffer. And so this, some of this data, I think, helped inform the House discussion about where to set the age level for the child tax credit in this bill. That's why they're sort of targeting young families more. And that's why you see in like the federal child tax credit in tax year 21, there was an expanded credit for young children. You could receive an extra $1,600 for young children in that tax credit in tax year 21. And that's, I think, precisely to address the sort of low income and poverty issues for families with young children. Any questions on this slide? Okay, so moving to the next slide, I was also asked to look at sort of what do we know about the federal child tax credit in tax year 21, and how did it affect families across the income distribution. And so just as a reminder, the federal child tax rate was greatly expanded for tax year 21. It used to be $2,000, but for tax year 21, it was up to $3,600, and it was fully refundable for a wider swath of the income distribution. And then there were these advanced payments of up to $300 a month per child for young children. And so that was only for tax year 21. It has not since been renewed. And so I was asked to look at, how did that impact, families in the U.S. To sort of potentially get a sense of what it might do in Vermont. But I want to emphasize that, these are proxy impacts in Vermont from a child tax credit. But the first thing is this child tax credit being proposed here is not nearly the size of the federal tax credit, but it is still substantial. So I don't want to present these results and make it seem like, we're going to get the exact impact from this child tax credit bill, but I would say the direction is probably similar. But I want to make the point that we do not formally estimate or offset the cost of the tax credit based upon, some of the results that we're seeing from the federal child tax credit. And so the cost of this bill is $48 million. It may, as I'm about to show, may reduce child poverty, but that's not something that we account for in the offset the cost of, say, the Dr. Dinosaur program or some of the incentives not incentives, but programs we have within the education fund because of these child tax credits. So, and with that sort of caveat here, the early literature on the federal expansion of the child tax credit and the monthly payments is that it had a very large impact on child poverty, precisely because it was really targeted towards, particularly the expansion towards that group that I was talking about in my earlier slides, families with young children. So one study in 2021 out of Colombia found that 6 million children were brought out of poverty in July 2021 alone. That's a drop in child poverty of 40%. And that July 2021 was the first month that the federal child tax credit advance payments went out the door. So they found a reduction in child poverty. A second group of researchers in 2022 found a 26% reduction in food insecurity amongst households receiving those monthly payments. Another group of researchers found that a permanent expansion would reduce child poverty by 5.9 percentage points from 14.2% to 8.4%, which is about 4.3 million children brought out of poverty because of a permanent expansion of the 2021 federal child tax credit. Another interesting study that I found that was interesting was that the federal child tax credit likely led to a small labor force decline. And that was because they said because of poor mothers choosing to stay home as a result of the credit. So rather than going out and working to sort of maintain keep the family out of poverty, for instance, or to keep incomes up, these mothers might have chosen just to stay home because of the child tax credit. So there was a small decrease in the amount of the labor force participation rate, but they also noted significant drops in child poverty. So the overall theme across these 4 studies that have been done for tax year 21, the child tax credit, that there is likely, if you give families money, particularly families with young children money, you're likely to see a drop in child poverty. With the one study noting that there could be a small decrease in labor force participation because of mothers choosing to stay home. The final analysis that I looked at was, what did people...
Graham, just on that last point, wouldn't we assume that to the extent there was some evidence that people decided to not be in the workforce, they presumably were not households that counted for a reduction in poverty, right? Nobody is foregoing a job because they get $600 or $1,200 a month and having their economic situation radically change. Is that a fair assumption?
I'm trying to remember the study. It might have been a reduction in hours worked. So you might not see a total drop out of the labor force, but you might see just, someone doesn't pick up an extra shift if they don't need to, for instance. I think that might also be the effect that they were showing there, but I can't remember exactly whether it was labor force participation or hours worked. I'll double check that.
Okay, thanks.
The final slide is just basically looking at, based upon census surveys of the child tax credit, what people were using the money for in tax year 21. So 1 in 4 families used, this is a survey from the census, used the advanced child tax credits to pay for childcare. And that's especially true for families with young children. And that's what these kind of charts are showing. I'll get to them in 1 second. 40% used the child tax credit to pay off debt. And from late July through September, 50% of recipients of the child tax credit reported spending at least part of it on food and about 4 in 10 on rent or mortgages. The pictures on the right essentially show you how people use the federal child tax credit depended very much upon the age of the children. So on the first chart, there is, what percentage of those who received the child tax credit spent it on school-related expenses. And the sort of purplish line is for at least one child between the age of 5 and 17, and the orange line is for only children under the age of 5. And you can see, because children 5 to 17, go to school, people who have those children tended to use their child tax credit money on school-related expenses. But the second chart on the right is for childcare. And so you see that it's exactly flipped. Families with children between the ages of 5 and 17 don't have as much childcare expense as those under the age of 5. And so the orange line, about 20 to 30% of the recipients spent their child tax credit money on childcare. And so because the Vermont child tax credit year is for children ages 6 and under, it's probably stands to reason that those recipients, there's a good chance that a lot of them will use it on childcare, because this is the information we have from the federal child tax credit. Because this information says that for families with children under the age of 5, almost a third of them were using the money on childcare.
Okay, questions? Okay.
I have a question. Graham, this is interesting, your last slides, but it also seems sort of arbitrary, like us fretting about where lower income families spend the money. Is it compared to childcare because an alternative to this tax expense has been a childcare tax credit proposal? You know what I mean? I guess I'm trying to to me, the reduction in poverty is important and an obvious data point. Trying to decipher what people are spending it on is a little less interesting. So I'm just wondering if it's looking at childcare, because there have been discussions about how we should use this money in a slight different way in order to directly subsidize childcare, because that's also a big need.
Yeah, I see that. I see the question. I don't think I was asked to examine what the people were spending their money on in the context of, potentially trying to come up with something different. Should we spend a chunk of this money on like a child care tax credit, for instance? Not like that. I think the committee was interested in, the Ways and Means Committee was interested in hearing, are there, secondary flow through impacts? And as I said earlier, JFO doesn't do that type of analysis, but what we can tell from the federal child tax credit is that, the money, a good chunk of it is a pretty good guess that it will end up in the childcare sector, because that's what we saw in the federal child tax credit. So to the extent that there are, say economic development benefits to boosting childcare, then you might get those from this child tax credit, because the analysis from the federal one shows that for families with children under the age of 5, a good chunk of them were using it on childcare. But this analysis was not to sort of help inform whether it would be better to, use the money on a child care tax credit or anything else like that.
All right, thanks.
Okay, any other questions for Graham? All right. Thank you, Graham. We are going to keep moving on.
Madam Chair, is Graham going to go over his revenue chart, or is that later in the agenda?
Graham, do you have another chart to go over?
Yes, but it's later. I think I'm on the agenda for 3:30, so I'll be back shortly to talk to the chapter.
I'm obviously eager.
We've got revenues and taxes. Yes, that's coming at 3:30.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to H627, which is an act related to the Vermont Economic Development Authority. Cassie Polomus is here for Vita.
Senator Cummings?
Yes.
This is Faith. I just heard from David and he'll be right with us.
David will be with us. Okay, and we've got Laura Collins with us. And Cassie, I'm going to assume you're one of the chief authors of this. So do you think it'd be more helpful to hear from you first, or have David walk us through the bill first?
I'm happy either way. Maybe I could just sort of summarize in layman's terms the changes in the bill, and then David can walk you through the actual legal document, which,
Okay, yeah, I think
Does that
that
make
might
sense?
be helpful, yeah. So what are we trying to do here? And then we can walk through the details.
sure. Okay, so Cassie Polimas, Vermont Economic Development Authority, thank you for having me in, and I'm really pleased to be here. I know this is not the time for it, but I would love to give you an update on what VITA's been up to, because I have not been in this committee for quite some time. So we'll save that for another meeting, and we'll just move forward to stay on schedule, and I'll cut to the chase with H627. So the changes that I am seeking for a VITA statute are two broad categories. One, to increase the maximum loan size in our direct loan program. It's currently at 1.5 million, up to 2 million if there's an energy component. That has not changed in over a decade. And before that, it hadn't changed even for, I don't know, 20 years or so. So it's long overdue to increase what we can do in that loan program. So for instance, we are capped out at maximizing our ability to leverage private money at a project size of 3.75 million, because we can't lend any more than 40% of a project. That is staying, that is not changing, that works fine. You know, the intent here is that VITA's public money, if you will, leverages private dollars. So that proportionality will continue to stay, but it will allow us to be more impactful on larger projects. So we can, you know, be more of a significant contributor on the impactful economic development projects that are much larger than 3.75 million. So that's a significant change, and that's the first change. The other change is to broaden the industries that we're allowed to lend to in our direct loan program. When the statute was created, it was, you know, 40, almost 50 years ago now. And the language is still somewhat geared towards industry and manufacturing and production of tangible products. With the service sector really becoming more and more dominant, we're not able to participate in the service sector in a meaningful way in our direct loan program. We do have a small business loan program that's not part of this, where we can lend to service sector businesses. So it is something that we have been doing, but we're capped out at a much smaller project size and much smaller dollar amount. But as you know, there are lots of significant businesses that are in the service sector that you know, might need to buy a new building to house their staff, and their staff may be web designers or you know, data analysts, or it might be in the healthcare, a private healthcare company, something of that nature. And right now we can't help in that service sector economy. So that's one of the areas of expansion. Another one is mixed use properties. And I'll give you typical examples that we encounter. A country store that might have an apartment. It's very clear in the VITA statute that we cannot finance anything to do with residential projects. So the only way we can help on something, a mixed use property like that, is to carve out the portion of the building that's residential and then finance up to 40% of just the commercial. So when you start doing the math on something like that, our contribution ends up being smaller and smaller. And most of the time it ends up being not significant enough or too much of a nuisance to have VITA in the funding sources if it ends up being such a small piece of it. Another typical example we encounter would be a building in a downtown village that has say, commercial space on the first floor and a couple apartments upstairs. So the proposal is to be able to handle those the way we handle our other projects, which is with the caveat that if 50% or more of the square footage is commercial space, that we could finance up to 40% of the entire project. Another category that
You have a question,
last one.
Cassie.
I'm sorry.
Kathy, I'm sorry, I should have asked you this earlier, but this is our first time, I think, looking at this bill. Are we talking about loans here or straight up grants?
Oh, loans. Sorry. Yep. Shifting gears here. This is VITA's, this is not COVID relief money. This is VITA's normal business. So loans.
Thank you.
No, thanks. That's a good clarification. Sorry, I made the assumption there. And so then the last category is properties or projects that fall into sort of a broad category of assisted living, all the designated agencies that may have a residential component to them, but are really a business, and the financing is looked at from a business standpoint. What are the services that are repaying any of the liabilities that that business has? And we do these now under our bond program, but we don't have any other tools in our normal lending programs to facilitate these transactions. Mostly because there is a part of it that includes a residential component if people are living there. But as I say, the source of repayment is, it's not looking at home ownership. It's looking at the services that that business provides. So for instance, the Small Business Administration allows it as an eligible use in their programs because they look at it as a business and not as a residential project. So I ran through those pretty quickly, but you've got increasing the loan size and then adding these other, I guess it's about 3 different sectors to the direct loan program. I will stop there and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have at this point, or Chair, it's your decision. Do you want David to take you through the bill?
Committee, any questions at this point? Okay.
I do have a question.
Okay. And Pearson.
Can you remind us, you have if memory serves, something like an annual $5 million, or what is your typical appropriation, and where are we slated? What was the recommended? What's the House looking at right now, just to understand, as you're asking us to make these changes, the scale of.
Yeah, there's no money tied to this, and we don't have any regular sort of annual appropriation. The appropriations that we receive from time to time are tied to a specific initiative. So the last time we received an appropriation was a couple of years ago when the VITA broadband program was put into our statute, and we received some appropriations to establish a loan loss reserve.
Okay. So otherwise it's a revolving loan fund.
Yep.
Thanks.
Senator Hardy.
Thanks. And Cassie, on page, I guess it starts on page 4, and I know David will go through this, but it looks like you're also explicitly naming some types of businesses that you would not loan to. Is that, I'm assuming this is new. It looks like it's new language, or is this just re-clarifying it?
Yeah, that's, when it went through the House, there was some discussion about the service sectors and would we consider any business in the service sector? And so there was sort of a compromise there to add sort of the typical businesses that we would not lend to. So that's why those are in there. I mean, we wouldn't lend to them now. So it's nothing really new. It's just it's just called out specifically to make sure that we don't lend to
Okay.
businesses that are,
Codify your current practice. You wouldn't lend to them anyway at this point.
right.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, Senator Surratt.
Thank you, Cassie. When you make a loan under your general program, are there requirements as to what the money is used for? And is that followed up on, or is it just a general business loan?
No, absolutely. I mean, every application, it's for a specific purpose. And so when you say follow up, if it's a construction project, we do site visits to make sure that the building is being built, and we fund it as the building's being built. We don't typically fund it all up front. If it's to purchase a piece of equipment, we get that invoice for the piece of equipment. If it's for general working capital, it's going to be in the financial statements, our annual review of the business, and we ask for, in our loan documents, it's required that businesses submit financial statements on at least an annual basis so that we see how they're performing and continue to have the ability to repay the loan.
So it sounds like a very basic question, but what makes you different from a bank? Is it your interest rates, or do you take greater risks that a bank might take on some of these projects?
Yep, it's both. So we take a greater risk because typically we are the subordinate lender, which means we're subordinate in lien position. So if it's a mortgage on a building, the bank, as I described earlier, might finance 50% of that building, either to purchase it or to construct it. And we'll finance 40%, and our mortgage lien will be underneath the bank. The bank will be senior, Vita will be junior to the bank. So that makes it a higher risk loan. Our interest rates are low for the risk profile that we take. So, sometimes we're lower than the bank, sometimes we're a little higher. We're generally around where the bank is, but we're at a higher risk than the bank. So on a relative basis, we provide low interest rate loans for economic development. That's, part of our mission.
Thank you.
Okay. So David, you want to walk us through the bill? Okay, floor is yours.
Sure. Happy to do that. Would you like me to share my screen, or are you just looking at it locally?
I think sharing the screen is helpful.
Okay. Well, for your record, David Hall, Legislative Counsel. So I'm showing on my screen, hope you see H 627 as it was passed by the House.
Okay, can you make that a little bigger?
I can.
Yeah, that's good.
Look okay?
Yes.
Great. So my thanks to Cassidy. I think she's done all the hard work to give you the sense of what this bill is doing. And, it's probably a good time for me to take a bigger step back and remind the committee, because it's been a while, that VITA is, a state instrumentality created in statute. But so it has things like limitations on the types of programs that it can engage in, dollar values on and caps on the maximum amount of loans and total lending and total moral obligation of the state that it uses to fund projects, and annual reporting requirements. It is very much like VHCB, VHFA, VSAC in those respects, that it is a state instrumentality, but it is also a freestanding nonprofit that operates more or less independently without basically using its own funds for its operating costs and earnings, and does not frequently have and does not regularly have state appropriations through our appropriations process at this point. So when VITA comes back on a bill like this to change the parameters of its underlying and authorizing statute, the changes are necessary to allow it to change how it operates as limited by Vermont law. And the changes that are in this bill, again, are really threefold, I would say. One is the scope of the types of businesses that it can work with. So expanding to service businesses and housing. Two is to increase the dollar values in the direct mortgage loan program, as Cassie discussed. And then the third, really just clarifying that VITA can work with nonprofits in its portfolio. I mean, I think it already can, but I understand from the background of this bill that there has been some confusion about whether a nonprofit was an eligible entity to come to VITA, and they are. So there are some housekeeping changes in here that seeks to clarify that point. So it is 10 pages long, but there's a lot of material in here that is really just for background so that people can see the context of the changes. And I'll say that, like a lot of older statutes, this could use a significant modernization and rewrite to more closely and accurately reflect the evolution of VITA over time, but it's a huge undertaking. It's a very big statute. So this is sort of like getting the job done within the confines of what we have without trying to rewrite the whole VITA statute. So on page 1 here, this falls in Title 10, Chapter 12. And this definition of eligible facility is very important because it is basically, while it's the construct is, it's sort of a general catch-all of what we mean when we talk about the types of things they can invest in. But then there's this Frankenstein list of things that have been added over time. So as Cassie mentioned, VITA began really as an industrial development tool, but it has expanded significantly over the decades. And so, it's happened in a piecemeal fashion. So we have this sort of general construct here at the beginning, but then we start tacking on examples of the specific types of things that it can do. The first change you'll see is the addition at the bottom of the first page and into the top. And it says endeavor relating to housing unless otherwise authorized in this chapter. So this is where there's sort of a blanket prohibition on VITA being involved in residential finance. And because we want to slightly expand that in some certain circumstances, this language is added to say, general rule, not housing, exceptions provided later in the statute. So here on page 10, you'll see, such enterprises or endeavors that they can lend to may include. So again, in our statutes, include it means including but not limited to. So these are examples of things that VITA can do, and it's long. It's quarrying, mining. Gosh, I'm not going to go through all of these, but what matters here is the additions starting here in subdivision P. So it could be any combination of all of the activities that we've just addressed. Eligible facility could include structures, appurtenances. That includes utility line storage accommodations, offices, facilities, transportation facilities. Fine, that's just sort of housekeeping, legal language stuff.
What are appurtenances?
What?
I'm sorry, David, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. The word appurtenances? What?
Appurtenance.
What does that mean? Don't know that word.
An appurtenance generally means something that is appurtenant to a structure. It usually means it's like a fixture or something that goes along with the capital facility itself. So, things that are affixed or in service of a structure or building.
Okay,
So
so
like
there's
a
Rockins and
garage
garage, okay.
is appurtenant to a house.
Got it. Okay, I've never seen it used in that form.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Little wonky. So Q here is the addition of service businesses. So that's businesses providing intangible products and services, but excluding the following. So businesses engaged in pyramid sale distribution plans, where a participant's primary incentive is based on the sales made by an ever-increasing number of participants. Businesses deriving more than 1/3 of their gross annual revenue from legal gambling. Private clubs and businesses that limit the number of memberships for reasons other than capacity. And businesses principally engaged in teaching, instructing, counseling, or indoctrinating religion or religious beliefs, whether in a religious or a secular setting. I think that these exceptions were developed in consultation with the Treasurer's Office and are reflective of exclusions and other federal lending programs. So I don't think they're far outside the usual universe of things we typically would not lend to. My understanding is these are not the kinds of businesses that VITA would normally be lending to anyway, but these are the explicit exceptions that the House chose to include.
Send this around.
David, you go back a page?
Yep.
At the bottom. Go up a little bit more.
What subdivision?
Yeah, business providing intangible products and services. What is the word intangible qualify? I mean, why do we need the word intangible in there?
Well, an intangible product would be like computer software, something that you don't really touch. It's not like a widget or a tire. It's much like a service. It's an intangible. So computer code. I don't know, accounting. I'm not sure what else would be an intangible product, but I think it's mostly computer related.
So does the word intangible modify services as well? I mean,
I don't think so.
Okay, so a dry cleaning store could qualify for a loan. Doesn't have to be some sort of intangible.
Cassie has popped up, so
What's that?
Cassie has popped up. I think she might be able to help us.
Oh, I was just gonna, add on there. So, but to follow your thread, Senator, dry cleaning would be a service, yes, because they're not producing a tangible good. They're not producing the clothes. They're cleaning them. So that would be an example. Or I was thinking just, close to home here for me, I've put up the glass partitions and all the open cubicle space here in our VITA office. So the company that manufactures those partitions produces a tangible good, but I had a different company install them. That company provided the service of installing them. So that would be an example of another example of a service company. And there's just endless examples of service companies.
Okay.
So intangible just modifies products. It's not meant to modify services.
Right. Okay, David, let's.
Good. I do have a question about, let's see, where's the list? Oh, well, maybe we're not there yet, but
Let's start here.
well, I'll wait till you get there.
Are we ready to move on to subdivision R, mixed use properties?
I think we have one question on what you can't loan to.
Okay, good. Well, that's where we are.
Okay, sorry. So the gambling one is interesting to me that it's a 20, now I've lost it, the 20%. Right, that's the cap. So I think of like an Elks Club or something like that, which would have typically some kind of, well, no, they're supposed to give all of that revenue away. So I'm intrigued that it's 1/3 of their annual revenue. We would let it be 30% would be okay. And I'm just wondering if you can give us some examples, because I don't think of too many operations in Vermont that revolve around gambling.
Yeah. That's a good question. And that is straight from an SBA, a Small Business Administration list. But the examples that I could think of that might fall into that would be say a retail store that sold lottery tickets, whatever revenue they get from, we could finance that as long as
Okay,
less than a third of their gross annual revenue is from selling the lottery tickets.
well, that'd be a lot of lottery tickets. Okay. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions on,
It was something.
all right, let's move forward. Make it-
Subdivision R, this is the mixed-use properties that are at least 50% commercial that Cassie referenced. So the first floor general store with the apartment upstairs. S is where Mara and VHFA really come in, because there can be some overlap here between who has authority for what, and where the house settled was what you see. So after consultation with and deference to VHFA on applications that are eligible for financing from both VITA and VHFA, financing for one or more of the following types of long-term care facilities that are licensed by the state and any independent living facility associated with the licensed facility. So these are all the licensed facilities, and if they have an associated independent living facility as they appear in Title 33. So that includes the assisted living residence, a home for the terminally ill, a nursing home, a residential care home, and a therapeutic community residence. Questions?
Senator Surratt.
So this is a prohibition against loaning to this group of entities.
No, this is actually part of the list of what they are allowed to do. And but it does obviously come with the limitations that are present in the subdivision.
Okay.
We'll have Laura talk to us a little bit about that. Okay, David, why don't you finish up the walkthrough and then we'll time.
Sure. We are almost there. So we'll skip ahead now to the direct mortgage loan program. And as I mentioned at the top, the addition of nonprofit here is just clarifying. I think they're actually already covered in the term person, but not everybody knows that person includes the whole universe in our Vermont statutes. So I think this is one of those harmless additions that signals that we also mean to include nonprofits. On page 8, this is where we increase the amount that VITA is authorized to provide for a single loan under the direct loan program. So that increases from 1.5 million to 5 million. I believe that the last time that was increased was 2013, I want to say. That was a lifetime ago, back in January, that this bill went through the House, but I believe it's been that long. And then there is another increase in this next piece, and this is specific to generation of heat or electricity that use biomass. So all these renewable energy facilities, that is currently in law capped at $2 million per project. It would be increased to $6 million. But as with all of these, as Cassie mentioned, they are capped at a 40% total across the projects. And that's it.
Okay, questions for David? All right. This is just our first walkthrough. Laura.
Good morning, or afternoon, very much afternoon. I'm Maura Collins with the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, and I'm here just to speak about that one little phrase that talks about expanding VITA's statute to allow for them to lend on housing projects because we tried to anticipate questions the committee may come up with. And one question that we heard from the House was, wait a minute, I thought that VHFA lent on housing and VITA lent for economic development. And that is true. But as Cassie pointed out, reality is a little murkier, and it is not uncommon for there to be, as Cassie pointed out, there's actually, I don't know if VITA is the lender on this one, they might be, but there's in, I think East Calais, there's a general store that has 3 apartments.
I saw the picture the other day.
That's right, Chris Cochran, last time I was in here testifying.
I tried
Yep.
to sell that building for several years. I'm very familiar with it.
Yes. And so there are 3 apartments there. Those apartments are being renovated as a part of this transaction and this renovation of the entire building. That's an example where bringing in VHFA to be a lender for 3 apartments in what is otherwise predominantly a commercial loan does not make sense, nor in that situation would VHFA really offer substantial benefit because the scale is so limited. And VHFA would not be an appropriate partner because we don't lend when a building is predominantly commercial. And so this just carves out times and spaces when it's appropriate for VITA to cover the residential piece if they are otherwise covering the commercial piece. And so I just wanted to be clear that VHFA is speaking in favor of this change because it is efficient. And these are situations that do come up. I think that another time with the listing of all of the licensed care categories makes for quite an awkward sentence. So kudos to David for following English grammar and being able to get all that crammed into one sentence. But we do see times when VITA is underwriting and lending to a business that offers assisted living, which is, there is a residential component to that, but that is predominantly a business loan, a commercial loan, because it's really the care is underpinning what that project is. And the fact that home is also offered as a service is a bit more minor. And so allowing for VITA to be a lender in those situations makes sense because there are many times that VHFA would probably opt to not do that loan for assisted living if it does not serve our mission, which is really focused on low and moderate income Vermonters. So I believe I've heard Cassie say that Wake Robin is an existing customer of theirs that they've worked with. Wake Robin is not a customer of ours, and we don't serve their population. That's not in our sweet spot. So I really appreciate that the language says that VITA shall consult with and defer to VHFA, because decades from now, VHFA may have an assisted living line of business. And so this does reserve VHFA's rights to lend in this space. But right now, we do not do assisted living lending to high net worth households served through these kinds of projects, nor do we have any plans to. And so I think it's important for the state's needs to be served, especially with an aging demographic and knowing that we need more assisted living. We would want to make sure that there are opportunities through an entity like VITA, like VHFA, to make sure that these are served. So I'm happy to answer questions, but really I'm just here to say this all makes sense to VHFA. We've worked with VITA on this language, and this works for us.
Okay, any questions for Maura? I'm not seeing any. So thank you. I think this is a good run through. We're starting to hear about in health and welfare, people with developmental disabilities that are or their parents are aging, they are aging, and they need care. And right now, it sounds like they bounce around to a series of foster homes. So I'm assuming that if the decision is that maybe there should be a series of perhaps specialized homes that would probably come under assisted living facility.
It would, and that would be a time that VHFA, we've been talking with the Agency of Human Services about this. Actually, for many years, we've been trying to apply to HUD to get federal money to support this program and haven't been successful, and just renewed those conversations in light of a bill that's making its way through the State House. But that's an example where even though it's, we have lent on assisted living for lower income Vermonters, and that's an example where VHFA would likely still provide a service because those individuals served with developmental disabilities would presumably be within our income range. They're often very low income. And so that would be an example where VHFA probably would do the lending. And we've been talking with AHS about some of the opportunities there. But you're right, there's, last I knew, it was over 2,500 Vermonters who are living in shared living environments. And there are legal court cases that require that people be offered the opportunity to live in the community, in the least restrictive setting possible. And so VHFA would be happy to be a partner with the state to make sure that we're following that. It was called the Olmstead decision, a legal Supreme Court decision that requires that. And so, so it doesn't mean all assisted living goes to VITA. It really goes back to the residents of the housing and their situation, frankly, their income.
Okay. So that is helpful. All right.
One just quick question.
And we're going back to Greg.
Cassie, I'm assuming that your list would include childcare centers of businesses that you could loan to. They're nonprofit service providers, yeah?
Yes, yeah, that's in our normal, right. I thought you meant like in the housing context. No.
No.
Yes, no, childcare centers are definitely something that we can lend to. And with this expansion, it will be very clear that we can lend to it in our direct loan program. Right now, we're limited to our small business loan program.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Somebody's putting a child care in Bennington College. I can't believe that's a small business.
Oh no, it's Southeast College, that's like
it.
Castle.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, everyone. This is our first walkthrough. We will be back to it. We're now going back to Graham, who has Graham, revenue and taxes. Is this our annual? This is what we're looking at?
This is, Madam Chair.
Okay.
So for the record, Graham Campbell from the Joint Fiscal Office. I prepared a document for the committee that should be on the committee's webpage, but I will share my screen just so we're looking at the same thing. And I'll zoom in here. This is a very large, lot of numbers, a lot of lines document. And I'm hoping I can walk the committee through it so you have an understanding of what exactly you're looking at. So the context for this is Stephanie Barrett and Senator Kitchell came before this committee last week and basically stated that they're asking this committee to keep any tax decisions at or below $40 million. So in revenue reduction. And so I'm here to give you a sense of what you have passed already, or at least passed in this committee or in some other committees that have passed tax legislation in the Senate, and give you a sense of where you are now. And then I've created sort of a hypothetical. This is not anything that has passed, but it just gives you a sense of, you know, the overall story of sort of saying that based on what's likely to come over and that what has come over from the House, the 40 million, I should say there's some tough decisions that need to be made in this committee. That is how I'd sum it up.
I think
So
we've gotten that message.
yeah, so that's good, because then it's not necessarily me breaking the bad news completely. So what you're seeing in front of you right now is a document that I prepare, and Stephanie Barrett and I sort of work in tandem to keep track of all the revenue and tax bills that are going through the legislature in a given year. And then she takes this information and puts it into sort of a general fund balance sheet of ups and downs relative to the governor. And that's more or less how JFO helps build the number here for the budget about resources and things that are available. So the first, what you see are on the left side of this table are all the sort of revenue and tax proposals that have either been in the governor's budget, have appeared in a House bill, or have appeared in a Senate bill. And so every bill has a line on this table. If there's a bill number associated with it, I've tried to list that in the second column. The third column gives a brief description of what is in that provision. So a lot of these are in the same bill, but I've sort of broken them out by provision just in case committees try to or want to either strike or change one of the provisions in the bill. And the top half of this very large set of tables, lines 1 through 23, gives you the general fund situation of tax and revenue implications for the general fund. So I'll walk through this by starting with the administration line columns. So this is the tax and revenue proposals that have been put forth by the administration in their budget. So there was a sports betting assumption in there that raised $2 million. There was a full exemption for military and survivors in that budget with a reduction in revenue of 3.25. There was an expanded earned income tax credit and child dependent care credit, and that was about $9.5 million to the down. There was an expansion of the Social Security exemption of about $30,000. That was a $14 million cost. A student loan interest deduction of about $3.3 million. A nursing income tax exemption of another 12. A child care worker tax credit, which was a $1,000 refundable credit for child care workers, which cost about $5.5 million. There was an expansion of the manufactured housing credit within the affordable housing tax credit of $1 million. A downtown tax credit expansion of $2 million. And then all the way down on line 18 in their miscellaneous tax bill, they proposed to repeal the Vermont alternative minimum tax of about $450,000. So based upon our estimates, the governor's budget of new tax proposals would reduce general fund revenues in fiscal year 23 of about $49.08 million. So when the budget came over to the House from the governor, it included $49 million of tax revenue decreases relative to the forecast. And so the available general fund tax revenue for the House budget coming over from the governor's was $1.874 billion. That's line 23.
Can you raise that a little bit? We're being blocked by the water. Okay, thank you.
So that's more or less what's come over from the governor's budget. The next three columns are what I'm labeling as the Senate position right now as it stands, as it stood on March 18th, but more or less stands currently. All right. So what you all have passed in Senate Finance Committee or in other Senate committees that have passed sort of tax legislation, the main one is the Senate Economic Development Committee. But you have passed a military retirement and survivors exemption. Yours is considerably smaller than the governor's. This was the $10,000 that you passed in S53. It reduced revenues by $450,000. Now, you did not take up any of the governor's proposals from line 3 through 8. But what the Senate has done, I believe this was an S226, and my understanding, speaking with Pat Sidderton, another analyst in our office, is that these might get moved to a different bill. So it says S226 here, but it likely will end up in a different bill. But you did an expansion of the manufactured housing credit of $250,000. Remember, that's a tax credit it's a 5-year tail. So every expansion increases by that amount over the next 5 years. So you see 250,000 this year, $500,000 the next year, and 750,000 the following year, all the way up to $1.25 million by year 5. There is an expansion of the downtown and village tax center program as there was an S226, again, could be a different bill, of $2 million. So that's a $2 million to the down. And then we're getting to the corporate tax changes in 13, 14, and 15. So there was the change to the throwback rule, the repeal of the 80-20 language, and the Joyce to Finnegan switch of methodology for apportionment. Those 3 net out to about $2.89 million. And then on line 20, there's the civil service retirement pension exemption of about $490,000 in revenue reduction. And then finally, line 21, I mean, Stephanie and I have kind of gone back and forth on this one about how this should be booked, because it's not really a tax item, but it came out of this committee. But the way this shows up is an increase in the appropriation for the tax departments. Every year there's an appropriation for the per parcel fee that this committee talked about. That bill S214 increased the per parcel fee. I shouldn't say increased, it repealed one of them and made both of them a $12 increase. And so what that means is that the appropriation for that section of the budget needs to go up by $850,000. So we're sort of booking that in this purpose as an $850,000 reduction in revenue. And so the sum of all those pieces in line 22 is, as it sits right now, the Senate's position is that you have passed officially about $860,000 of tax cuts for fiscal year 23. And then because once the sort of corporate tax changes come online in future years, you're sitting in a net positive position, about $4.45 million in 24 and $4.2 million in 25. Is everyone following me so far?
Yeah.
I have a question.
Mr. Roth.
CSRS again, can you say what that is and where that is passed in the Senate?
Yeah, so that's the civil service retirement pension. Those are the folks who did not receive Social Security. You guys passed that exemption in S53.
Okay. What's the difference between the middle column and the column on the right? I can't see the heading.
Sorry, what's that?
That's what they
Senate
think
versus
we're
Senate
going to.
hypothetical.
Yes, sorry. So the middle column is what you have passed,
Right.
and that's sort of official. I don't know if lines 9 and 10, the affordable housing in downtown, have fully passed the Senate yet. It's my understanding that they were in S226, but they're sort of likely in the Senate position. So we're counting them right now. That's why I have them highlighted right now, because I don't think they have actually passed the Senate just yet.
They haven't. Okay. But
So
Senate hypothetical is you're assuming we might do something on child tax credit and on Social Security?
My third columns here are just purely a hypothetical, just to give, it's an illustrative example, mainly because the child tax credit is by far the biggest tax change here. And so really what this is not anything this committee's talked about or the Senate's proposed, but it gives you a sense of if the Senate is inclined to do something on the child tax credit, and it wants to stay under 40 million, it's going to have to either reduce the child tax credit or raise revenue. That's more or less the purpose of these 3 columns. So if you look at the committee just looked at H510. H510 is the child tax credit and the Social Security exemption bills over from the House. That bill reduces revenues almost about $50 million. The first is line 4. That's the small expansion of the AGI thresholds for the Social Security exemption. So $1.7 million to the down. But then line 11 is the child tax credit bill, portion of the bill, $48 million to the down. And so together, those two things are about 50 million. The only other thing I've sort of included in this illustration is the property transfer tax surcharge. Again, the Senate, you're not bound to this at all. It's just to give you an illustration, but it is a bill the committee has taken up. That bill also included line 9, the manufactured housing credit. Again, you could put it in a different bill, but more or less, if you include those 3 pieces, your net position is negative 47.7 to the down. And so that's more or less my takeaway for this committee today is in order to sort of hit that Senate appropriations number of 40 million, either you're going to have to raise revenues or you're going to have to cut back on one of the poor pieces of the child tax credit, or make some adjustments, or you don't have to do any of the House bills and you would end up in a position that's significantly better than the governor's and significantly better than the House.
Okay, Senator Pearson.
Graham, apropos of all of that, on the child tax credit, on your fiscal note for that, we get the very broad cost of what it means to extend this to all kids under 5 or under 6 in households with incomes between $100,000 and $200,000. And given this pressure that you're helping us reveal, are you able to give us a little bit of a more detailed breakdown? For instance, one might argue that we could cut it off at $150,000, and it would be good to know if that saves us 2 million or 12 million. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so I can model that for the committee. So right now the bill is 300 or 200,000 for both single and married. So I could model it 150,000 for both singles and married, or do 150 single, 300 married. To those two proposals. What I can tell you today is the bill is for children 6 and under. If you went to 5 and under, it would cost about $41 million. And so basically that, if you made that change, you would be a lot closer to the 40 million that is being asked of the Senate Appropriations Committee. So that's one route you could take. The other is changing the income thresholds, but I don't have any information for you on that today.
Yeah, just helping us to understand some of our options, you know, along different themes would be a benefit to me.
Okay.
So Graham, I'm trying to understand what the bottom line is. We had 40 million to spend, right? And we have spent so far
860,000.
860,000. So the decider is we have to take 860,000 off of the child tax credit, not do any more decreases. And Senator Kitchell gave us a whole list of decreases that are in her committee that they're asking, starting with 12 million to run the unemployment system. But we need to raise 900,000. Is that?
I'm trying to think of how to best phrase this. Right now, if you did nothing else for the rest of the session and your bottom line number was 860,000,
Yeah.
that would be significantly better than what Senator Kitchell is sort of saying, please don't spend more than 40 million. You spent 860,000. So she would have, $39 million more to play with.
Cover all these other things.
No, I think her 40 is including all of that.
Is including all of
I
that.
think so too.
So
That's
guess-
98 million.
Yeah. Including the 40 million.
The
So I-
40 is not in there. That was,
It's in the letter, I think.
it's in the
Somewhere
top.
in there.
It's in the top part of it.
Okay.
my understanding was that the request was that this committee not do any more than 40 million in tax issues, or reduce revenues by more than 40 million.
Okay, so that's, I think, all right, what she's saying is she's got to deal with all of this. And in order for her to balance the budget and do some or most of these things that are in other bills, then we can't spend more than the 40. Okay,
That's
And-
right.
already spent 800,
You've only spent 860,000. So
but the child tax credit will put us over.
yes, that's more or less the construct that I'm showing you here in this hypothetical. Is the child tax credit, if you do it in its full, will put you over the limit. So either you need to scale back that child tax credit or some other portion of your bill, or raise revenue to offset the amount that you're over.
And Graham, can somebody in your office do us a list? I know of potential revenue. I know that sports betting is kicking around and Senator Kitchell's talking about putting that on the child tax credit. I know that Ways and Means did not raise the registration fund on mutual funds. I think that raised about 6 million. There are probably other things kicking around out there. We've got a list of costs. If there's a list of potential revenue sources
Sure.
that anyone could help us think about, that might help.
Right. Yeah, I can help with that. I mean, I think the overall line that I would say is that you're either going to have to cut somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 10 off of your tax out of the child tax credit, or other proposals, or raise that equivalent amount to offset the child tax credit expense. Because right now, if you were to implement that completely, then you'd be somewhere around the 47 to $50 million to the down, depending upon whether you did the property transfer tax surcharge in H437.
The other out there. All right. Senator Surcharge.
Thanks, Graham. On the corporate tax changes, even though that was in a bill that hadn't passed from last year, the governor didn't include anything in his budget supportive of those tax changes?
That's correct. There's nothing in the governor's budget that assumes that these things will come in law, or as in sort of his normal construct. It's not as if he is suggesting that he wanted that to be in his corporate or in his tax package.
Okay, and can we get a chart like this with another column for what the House did?
Yes, we do that, but at the moment we're still trying to iron out what exactly that position is. So I didn't want to show it until I knew what the full position was.
Senator Strachan, it's worth noting that the portion of the corporate tax changes that the governor wanted cost money. So had he included it in his budget, he'd have to have a smaller budget.
Okay.
I think one final thing I would say here is even though the House columns are not, in this table, they are very similar to the governor. So regardless of what we decide to include, the budget will probably come over, and all the tax bills will come over to this committee with an expense, a tax revenue change of around 48 to 50 million in total.
We've already got a child advocate office minimum of 300,000, but probably going to 800 within a year or two, if not higher. We have approached, I think they're doing a lot of it with one time for the developmentally delayed services in the way that we are not, we just aren't doing a good job there. Community-based services. So there's bills kicking around with, 100,000 here, 100,000 there. Before you know it, you've spent money. Okay, thank you, committee. I think that's it, Faith. I think we can go